Hello, I'm David Geren. I'm here on behalf of the Center for Public Leadership with General Eric Shinseki. We're here for a conversation about leadership and leadership development, the Army way. General Shinseki served 38 years in the United States Army. He is well recognized as an individual who grew up in Hawaii. He's of Japanese descent. Remarkably enough, when he was born during the Second World War, his parents were treated by the United States government as enemy aliens, a dark chapter in American history. And here was a man who grew up with that background and rose to become Chief of Staff of the United States Army. Between the time of birth and his service as a chief, he served 2 terms in Vietnam, was twice wounded, once in a fairly grievous way, had to apply for a special waiver to stay in the Army. But he rose in the ranks, had commands in Europe, wore several hats, a NATO hat in Europe, wore an American hat in Europe, eventually went to Bosnia, where he had headed a UN-sanctioned operation, but headed NATO forces, and eventually came back to the United States to serve as Army Chief of Staff, and was an illustrious one. Among some in the public, he is remembered perhaps as much for anything for comments that were prescient before the Iraq War to the United States Senate when he was testifying, testified to the fact that it seemed to him that we would need several 100,000 troops in Iraq. That was a view that was not embraced by his administration, and yet in the end it was often a view that was seen as prescient, as one that had it been embraced might have made a significant difference in the course of the war, and especially in the immediate weeks and months after the formal hostilities seemingly came to an end. Or did they really? Did the hostilities end then? Always a question. But among many who are close to the Army, General Shinseki is known first and foremost as a visionary leader of the Army itself, an institution of over 200 years, that was over 200 years old, and he sought the transformation of the Army. He was well recognized as a man who went far down that path, and central to the transformation was an emphasis upon the development and growth of leaders within the Army. This is a man who's thought a great deal about it, so we welcome General Shinseki to this film series by the Center for Public Leadership. General Shinseki, we're so appreciative of you coming to Cambridge, of your taking your time with the students and others, and especially, sir, of your public service. We're enormously grateful for all. I'd like to ask you, not about your life so much, but perhaps we could do that another time, but about the Army's approach to leadership. What is the philosophy of the Army with regard to leadership?
Well, it's captured in those 3 words that appear on our leadership manuals: be, know, and do. And those are the aspects of the practice of leadership. It's not just the doing or just the knowing, but the being of what you understand your responsibilities are. And so those 3 words are sort of signature that ask each leader to apply himself and herself to being competent at their positions and being able to understand the requirements for competency of their subordinates, and ensuring that between their performance and the performance of their subordinates that they build competent organizations, that there is no opportunity for a point of failure and the performance of their organization.
Be, know, do. Know is something that presumably one can, the knowledge you can get in the classroom. That's something you can train people in the classroom and on the field. The do part is something I trust it comes mostly outside the classroom, actually being out in the field, out with the troops, learning how to be competent, build competent organizations.
That's
the
correct.
B part is about character.
It's about character.
So how does the Army train people to embrace values and build character?
Well, as you know, the Army has its own organizational values, and as you and I discussed, I'll spend a few seconds here relating that. The Army has always had an understanding of the importance of values, going back throughout its history. But values were, for the most part, prescribed by senior commanders. And the various units you went through, there was great overlap in those values, but not until 1997 that the Army as an institution codify a set of values. And the instant in time is February 1997. It's the Winter Senior Commanders Conference in Washington. The Chief of Staff then, Denny Reimer, has all of the Army senior 4-stars present. The Vice Chief is there. 5 of the 6 4-star commanders are also present.
You're one of those 6 4-star commanders.
I am one of a 3-star, and I am the Army Operations Officer. I am not one of the 4-stars, but I am sort of the executive agent. I'm the person who puts on the conference and coordinates it. And as such, I'm allowed to sit in the back of the room as a note taker. No other general officers are present, just the 7 or 8 commanders. The staff was assigned specified periods of time, 30 minutes, in which they would provide update briefings. And one of the briefings was on the new officer evaluation report, a key document because every officer in the Army is evaluated once a year by his supervisors. And this was a new form, and this briefer had the responsibility of showing the front and the back side of a blank form, a fairly simple process, and which to suggest that this is something that commanders needed to be aware of. It was about to go into effect. 3.5 hours later, the briefer, far exceeding his 30-minute allocation, gets to leave the podium. And I am treated to a rare insight of watching senior commanders who have spent now 30-some-odd years in the Army debate one another about the 7 words that were listed as Army values. And I could almost hear the debate. What do you mean by honor? How do you measure integrity? Why isn't competence part of this discussion? And after 3.5 hours, these commanders settle on the 7 words: loyalty, duty, respect, selfless service, honor, integrity, and personal courage, decided by them in a way that assured the Army that these values were going to define the institution for a long time to come. And as I've remarked on other occasions, I considered it then, and I still do, a privileged moment for having been able to witness this. And I've often wondered and hoped that similar discussions about organizational values go on in other gatherings of leaders.
Some values left off, like competence left out of the list. You had to exclude certain things to get there. But now the question becomes, how does one have an organization, how do you get individuals within the organization actually live the values? I'm reminded there are more than one corporation, but Enron is a prime example, that embraced or adopted a formal mission statement that if you read it, you thought, this corporation walks on water. It was a glowing affirmation of what an enlightened company would be, and yet the company itself then clearly was not able to live up to its own standards. How do you get an organization, how do you get people to live up to those values?
It's this is a challenge. I mean, creating the values is one thing. Embedding them is the huge challenge, and it must be done day to day. The nurturing of how those values translate into our activities and what's expected of even the youngest of our leaders, and meeting the obligations that come with those values is a slow and a careful process. And it takes great patience, and people stumble, and you have to be willing to give the opportunity to relearn and to do better. There are some violations that go beyond the law and must be dealt with accordingly, but for the most part, errors in judgment, most institutions in the Army can absorb, but if this is a process over time, and where the responsibilities are greatest, the risks are greatest. What you want are strong leaders at that point in time. So it's a matter of reinforcing the importance of those, the practice, adherence to those values. Over
Do you
time.
start that in the classroom, or where does this first take place?
It starts, yes, from the first formation in which youngsters, both officer and enlisted, are exposed to our values, and that begins in basic training and the discussions about what the values mean, what they stand for, and examples of where one of those values was particularly well illuminated by action or performance or position taken by a soldier previously, sort of shared as a teaching point.
So in effect, there are some case studies that are used, or examples that are used as teaching points about how honor was exemplified by a particular general or soldier.
Sure.
And this is how someone, if you said in another setting here that the honor would require you never to leave a buddy behind on the field.
That's correct.
And you need to understand that that's part of the honor that you're seeking. It's different from being integrity, which is more about candor and being integrated as a personality or person.
That's correct.
The honors of different value altogether here. But so you do work through case studies.
Some of them are easier to find examples for.
Right.
Others are more difficult and more abstract, and it takes a little bit more work. And honor would be one of those cases where you would have to find the kinds of examples that would be easily understood. I mean, you know, leave no soldier behind, don't leave a buddy behind on the battlefield is one of those key elements. Doing your duty on the most difficult of days when there is, you know, good reason to blink and second guess. Standing up to do your duty on those very difficult days has that aspect of application to honor. For each of the values, there is a considerable discussion that goes on so that they are not just 7 words on a poster chart someplace, but that there is a living, breathing aspect to how those values translate into our daily applications.
Well, these are time-honored values in the military, the Army. Robert E. Lee, I believe, once said it. He thought duty was the sweetest word in the English language.
That's the sweetest word?
Sweetest word.
Yeah.
Very much personally believed in that, and was honored as a result of that, that sense of duty. But do the soldiers carry these around with them in any fashion? Do they have these, where they carry them around in their wallets? Or
well, at one time we had little plastic tags made that they were appended to their identification tag chain, or added to their identification tags, and I think it was an initial step to just ensure that the values themselves were remembered and reinforced. And over time, that's become more and more a part of the culture of the Army. And when you think about the sequence in which I listed those values, loyalty, duty, respect, selfless service, honor, integrity, personal courage, they outline the word leadership. And that has helped sort of the memorization factor for most youngsters.
Oh, that's interesting. So that all connects up for them as well.
Yes.
And what about the young junior officers? How do you embed that with them? Does that, again, both classroom and field exercises that they come around to these?
Yeah, we have long believed that you know, growing, and I use the word growing as the active term here, developing leadership and leaders is a product of about 3 environments. One is certainly the classroom, where the theory is discussed and good examples of great leaders. And then we firmly believe that an officer has to, or a leader has to go out and apply himself or herself into the operational environment. because the practice of leadership and the study of the theory are, different things. A third piece here is that each officer has a personal responsibility in terms of self-study, reading the works that are generally recognized as important to the profession, and apply themselves in their own time of the study of our profession. So those three pillars represent the foundation on which leaders are developed.
That's interesting. So there's actually a list of books, a canon in effect.
That's correct.
For the officers, and they're given that. They know what that list is. They can go to the library. The books are there.
They're on a reference shelf, and the list is developed so that if you're a young officer, there's a certain set of readings, and then as you grow in responsibility, there are books that are at the next level. And finally, for those who serve at the most senior levels, there's a set of readings as well. So this is intended to be a development, professional reading over the lifetime.
You've indicated that there are two or three levels, really. One at the base level, you spend a lot of your time on the operational side.
Tactical level.
Tactical level.
Yeah, the next level is the operational level.
And then the strategic.
And the strategic.
So you also then time the teaching and the preparation, the training, the growing for those series of activities someone is going to do. You don't try to teach someone who's going to become a young officer what it is to be a strategist. You're not trying to teach Clausewitz at that point. You're trying to teach them, can you handle the tactical first?
That's correct. I mean, the formal application, or at least the classroom time, leaves Clausewitz to a later phase in their development. But certainly having this complete list, the youngster knows that there's a development process here, and they'll find the time to go read up about Clausewitz, even though they're not able to spend a lot of time studying theory of war. And but they will look at this as a milestone out in the future, and they'll learn more about Clausewitz on their own time. Sun Tzu, same thing.
Right. Yeah, but when you start then, before you're becoming a young leader in the Army, whether you can be a young officer or you're going to become a sergeant or something of that sort, there is basic training. There's an officer school.
That's correct.
That you go to.
Yes.
And how long does that last for a young officer?
Well, for a young officer, depending on the discipline he goes into, it's generally about 6 months. 6 months? Yes.
And then he has a specialty, or she has a specialty after that
they can go to further schooling if they're in a particularly technical field.
Right.
That would take them, to greater depth in a specific area. If you were in communications or, computers, for example.
But if you're in artillery, you might go straight in to a billet.
You, following your officer basic, you go straight into, your first unit of assignment, where you apply the theory that you learn in the classroom. And by and large, that's a process every officer goes through. Our history is not perfect in this regard. My own history in 1965, for reasons that all these many years later, I am still unable to understand fully why it happened. But I was one of several year groups in which decisions were made not to send us to the basic course. And the expectation was we would go to our first unit of assignment, normally a division and stationed stateside. And in about 2 years, and I think that's fair, in about 2 years we would have been exposed to all the tasks that we would have been expected to be proficient on and would have attained proficiency. 1965, you remember those times as well. Very quickly there was a decision to expand Vietnam. And those of us that reported into those stateside divisions without the basic course were suddenly mobilized to go to combat without having had that initial preparation. It's telling in several aspects, and perhaps for me the most telling is that the reason you want a competent formation is you want to have these kinds of episodes surrounded by the ability to compensate for an individual leader's lack of competence. I was the most incompetent person in my formation, and I was gifted to have a great young sergeant, E5, by the name of Ernie Kincaid, who took it upon himself to seek me out while we were aboard ship and sailing to Vietnam, to suggest that I probably could stand a little bit of training, which I immediately answered in the affirmative. And what Ernie did was to take a long mess hall table like this, around which people would sit, and between breakfast and lunch, and after lunch and dinner, sometimes even after dinner, when a mess hall was vacant, he'd raise one end of the table so there was a canted surface, and he would grid it with white string, as you would see on a map, and put me at the other end of the mess hall with a pair of binoculars, and he would put a target on this gridded surface and require me to then go through the sequence of calling for fire, coordinates, range, ammunition, and drilled me through registrations, shifts from a known point, zone fires, immediate suppression, fire for effect, all the missions a young forward observer would be expected to be proficient on, both for accuracy and speed. It's, you know, being accurate and slow is not an option. So it's fast and accurate. And we drilled and drilled and drilled, and you know, when I got off board ship, I was proficient at those tasks. Ernie's proficiency or competence was very important here. Had he not been skilled and had he not been as confident a young leader as he was to have come and sought me out, it would have, you know, this story would have had a different ending.
Sure. He was enlisted. He was E5, and you were an 01, 02?
I was an 01.
01.
Yeah, a young second lieutenant.
So you were his boss. You were his leader.
I was his boss.
But he was demonstrating how to lead up.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Gutsy.
On his part, you know, it's the quality of the young leader that the Army had developed, and that is to have the temerity to tell his lieutenant that I was the risk in the formation, and he was going to help me, you know, eliminate that, and then be good enough and have the initiative to come and do something about it. Knowing he had a problem was one thing; doing something about it was another. But with great leadership skills on his part, never making me feel that I wasn't in charge or somehow unable to, you know, to do my job because I didn't have these skills. But we worked hard. He was pretty demanding, and to this day, Ernie Kincaid is a hero of mine, both for what he represented to Rick Shinseki personally, but more importantly, perhaps, what he represented as a non-commissioned officer in a great army. That we have this kind of competence, and leadership at that level is equally as important as my leadership was.
He helped you get through the war.
Absolutely.
Absolutely. Fascinating. Now, this tactical level, one can stay there for most of your military career.
Many officers spend all their time in the tactical level. And generally the levels are separated by the mission and the span of control that a commander at that level exercises, up through our division commands, 2-star level, and possibly into the corps level commands, depending on what missions are given. Those are sort of in the tactical discussion.
So what does that mean, the tactical?
Well, it is at the level at which the focus is on very much the warfighting, the pure warfighting. At the operational level, your responsibilities begin to expand from pure military to other than just military skills, coordination in the interagency process, other non-governmental organizations. Then at the strategic level, you're talking about the national responsibilities where, for example, the chief of the service or the chairman of the Joint Chiefs is looking at the global responsibilities. There are some regional commanders' responsibilities that are at the edge of the operational and overlapping in the strategic realm. I would put into that category, for example, the Admiral Tom Fargo, the combatant commander for the Pacific. I mean, just the sheer geography that he has to deal with the entire Pacific Ocean and the far side of the Pacific Rim. Geography alone drives that into a strategic level perspective. As the commander of Army forces in Europe, our area of responsibility went from South Africa to the Baltics and included Eastern Europe.
Right.
It used to be part of the Warsaw Pact at one time, included the Middle East. And so again, this expanse of responsibilities and perspective puts you at that strategic level where you're dealing beyond just a sort of focused military problem.
Right. So one can almost think about this as concentric circles. If one starts with the smallest circle, which is you, you've got to get yourself straight here as a soldier, but then the next circle out is in taking responsibility at a tactical level, at this capacity, this warfighting level for the group around you. And then the next level out, the next circle out would be the capacity at the operational level to manage across organizational boundaries, not only your team, but managing across to another agency, managing a multifaceted, and then there's this final circle where you've got this large strategic sensibility, capacity. You've got to train as you grow out.
Absolutely. As you move through those levels, you never divorce. You may not be, as the commander, necessarily in the tactical realm, but you have tactical units that are now under your larger operational umbrella, and then a larger strategic umbrella. So there is this requirement to be knowledgeable, conversant, essentially competent enough to go and visit units at those lower levels so you understand what is happening and can anticipate challenges there. But your perspective in terms of responsibility and span of control and numbers of organizational entities has put you at a level where you're dealing in a different set of decisions.
Right. Does the Army send you back to school before you move from the tactical up to the operational?
Our schooling normally takes you through the Army War College, and at that point our students at the Army War College are colonels.
This is in Fort Leavenworth?
No, this is at Carlisle Barracks in Pennsylvania.
Oh, okay.
There's an Army War College there, or we could attend any one of the other war colleges as a representative of the Army. The Navy, we have students that go to the Navy War College, Naval War College. I attended the National War College in Washington, D.C. It's a year's course of study, but at the rank of colonel, you're generally still operating inside the tactical realm, but your schooling is at the operational strategic level, the theory of the operational and strategic levels of war. And that's as much preparation as we have today. And it's for those who move on to the 3- and 4-star promotions, they'll get to exercise the theory they studied as colonels.
At say, the Army War College. And this college is then for people who are colonels who also are thought to be on a fast track upward.
They are successful and expected to continue to be able to be competitive for other selections and promotion.
If they can move up, they can move up to the General Corps. They can become a general. If they continue on that arc, that path.
That's correct.
So excuse my ignorance, but what is the school then? What is Fort Leavenworth? I always thought that was
Fort Leavenworth is a course, a 1-year course for majors in the Army.
Oh, it's one level. It's one level down.
It's a level down.
Okay.
It's you're still in the tactical level, but there we're preparing officers for duties at battalion, brigade, and the division level.
I see.
So it's the part of the be no do. You prepare folks for those responsibilities, and then you send them out there.
Right. Well, what's interesting about this is the Army has developed a very sophisticated and plan for a continuing education. We prepare you almost at every big major jump in your life or career pattern, you're going to come back to school.
That's the expectation is that there is a sequential series of classroom attendance that prepares you for the next level set of responsibilities. Mm-hmm. You do that as a newly commissioned lieutenant, the officer basic course. You do that as a captain called the advanced course. You do that as a major attending the Command and General Staff College at Fort Leavenworth. And then you do that as a student at the Army or some other war college, generally at lieutenant colonel and colonel. And so it reinforces the other aspect of this, which is the self-study. And that is learning and leader development is a lifelong process of study, application, and thoughtful reflection about what those responsibilities entail.
And many officers also go back to civilian university. You went back too.
I did. I went back and picked up a master's degree in English literature, which some of my Army buddies have never let me forget.
Now, I'm curious about that. Now, why English literature? I believe that there was a former NATO commander who went back and got a master's or PhD.
Jack Galvin.
Yeah, Jack Galvin. He went to Columbia, I think.
He did. Fred Franks commanded 7th Corps and Desert Storm.
Yeah.
There are a few of us who somehow managed to overcome our English background.
Well, tell me why. I mean, I can understand the love of it. I'm curious about the interplay of your study of English literature and coming into the Army. I'm really curious about that.
Well, for me, it was a very specific requirement to go back, and I had been asked to go back and teach English at the military academy.
Uh-huh.
And as you know, in those days, all the graduates of the military academy essentially had an engineering background. And in order for me to qualify to teach at that level of collegiate study, I had to go back and get a graduate degree in English. And I remember very well in the early days of sitting in classes where I think I had 9 hours of undergraduate English, and I was there in a master's program with some very, very well-read and very powerful students who had gone to school in the civilian environment, who were English majors, by the way. And they would take notes on what the professor said, and in class. What I took notes on was every book and author that he mentioned that I had never read.
Huh.
And I had a long list of these names, and I spent for 2 years every waking moment just reading, just going through books that I had not been exposed to, in order to, have bona fides as a serious graduate student in English literature.
And you went out to teach at West Point?
I did, and at the end of 2 years, I mean, I closed a good bit of that gap, but it was hard work.
But tell me how it affected you as a leader in the Army.
Well, first of all, it's always, I think, it's healthy to have someone never quite sure of all, the details. They always say, well, is there anything else I haven't checked here? And that's sort of, that's reinforced in an experience like this. The other thing it did for me, and I get this question from young leaders from time to time, what is the one thing that you studied in college that, made a difference? And I say, well, there are lots of things that contributed, but one skill that I use every day is the ability to read, write, and speak our language. That in leadership, communications, effective communications, credible communications is a large part of the leadership responsibility. And therefore my study of English was a tool, a skill that I use every day. It does not matter what I'm doing, whether I'm testifying before Congress or speaking to youngsters in a ROTC program. That has been a skill that I've used every day, and I've valued that the Army gave me the time to go and study it.
S.L.A. Marshall, his famous officer's handbook that he wrote after the Second World War. It's got a couple of powerful chapters.
It does.
On communicating, capacity to communicate.
That's correct, yeah.
It's so interesting that. So
what's the difference between commanding and leading? I always make this distinction.
What is the difference?
Well, command is about the appointment to a position.
Right.
You know, the example I gave there of a time when I was commanding a unit in which there was a combat refusal, and circumstances that led up to that was contributed to by the Army in providing essentially a non-commissioned officer who was not validated, not certified to serve at the rank. He was a staff sergeant, but had been in the Army less than a year. And the decision was that we were short of non-commissioned officers, and so this was a decision to promote the top graduate of our basic training initial entry program and pin him with the insignia of a staff sergeant, something that normally takes years to acquire the experience to be able to serve at that grade. And this individual, none of us knew that he had been in the Army less than 1 year, and was discovered by one of the other young soldiers in my unit who had been assigned to go out on night ambush patrol with him that night, and who called it to our attention. I am not going, combat refusal. I'm not going because this guy doesn't know anything about leading a night combat patrol. And when I checked and discovered this young soldier was absolutely right. My responsibilities as a commander was one of two things. I could either ignore this refusal and tell him, okay, you'll do it another time, go back to your position, or I could prefer charges against him and proceed to go to a court-martial. Those were my commander's options, my commander's responsibilities. But I could sense, as I sat there talking to this soldier in the middle of my position with all of my combat vehicles encircling me, I could sense that there were soldiers on those vehicles who were just sort of leaning in our direction to get an idea of what I was going to do. My guess is if I had ignored it and chosen to do nothing, there would have been others who would have followed that first soldier. Court-martial to me was the other option that was less than right, because the soldier was right. And so I decided that I would lead the patrol that night. I told the first sergeant to take charge of my command vehicle, which my communications were on. I put a platoon leader, the first platoon leader, as I recall, in command of the troop, and I took the patrol out that night. I went down, and the designated patrol leader, the staff sergeant who didn't have the experience, I made my assistant patrol leader. This soldier was told he was going to go, which he did, and I used it as a training vehicle to train that young sergeant on how to do a night combat patrol and to ensure that this soldier did his duty, and that settled the issue for everyone else in the unit. Well, the rest of the story is, as things happen this way, a battalion commander calls while I'm gone, finds me absent, and next morning, totally uneventful patrol, by the way, until I return the following morning, where it becomes eventful, and I have a message from the battalion commander to report immediately, which I do, and he is very unhappy. Make sure I understand that in no uncertain terms, and I'm on the verge of being relieved. Even accuses me of being off on a lark, doing this. And I acknowledged he was right. I told him he was right. You're absolutely right. I was absent from my place of duty, but I have a problem. my problem was between commanding and leading. My choices were clear in terms of command. I should punish this soldier for refusing to do his duty. The unfortunate thing is the soldier was right. The system was wrong.
Right.
And sadly, it was the soldier who discovered the incompetence here on the part of this staff sergeant and brought it to our attention. And there must be a way for me to address this. And I chose then to exercise the leadership responsibilities. And that solved that problem. Train that sergeant so he's not a liability, but he could contribute to the mission. Make that soldier perform his duty, so I won't have to punish him. And then reinforce for all of the youngsters who were sort of leaning to hear what my judgment was going to be, to reinforce with them that I was also the leader of our unit, not just the commander.
Right.
And those two responsibilities are very close, but they're not the same thing.
So command is not only about appointment, but it's a fairly rigid approach to one's followers, one's troops, in which you do it by the book, and it's also, you will do this, you will do that. And if you don't do it, you're going to be punished. But leadership has more to do. It's more sensitive, it's more understanding of the situation that you find yourself in.
It's about solving problems.
It's about solving problems, but it also, it seems to me that you, in this situation and in others I've heard you talk about, show enormous sensitivity to sort of what's behind what this soldier is doing. It's not just what I'm confronted with, what's behind it I need to understand before we figure out how to solve the problem. And to a degree that's a lot about empathy with that soldier, that this has what's now being called emotional intelligence. The need for a leader to have emotional intelligence is to be able to empathize with someone else and then have the skill sets, the social skill sets to then deal with that situation, solve that problem. And is that a necessary part of leadership?
Well, I think it is.
Yeah.
No, I think it is. This is the respect and the values. It is understanding that despite the fact that you have the authorities which are not quite absolute but pretty significant, that the exercise of those authorities in ways that contribute to a willingness to follow your orders is an important part of leadership. And one of the definitions, I'm always asked about a simple definition, and I always apologize because I never am able to find one. But a definition I've used is getting people to do what they wouldn't ordinarily want to do with enthusiasm. And in order to...
With enthusiasm. That's the hardest part.
We can get people to do what we want them to do on command. I mean, that's the authority.
Yeah.
But if you're going to get this buy-in and this sense of energy, it is getting them to do it with enthusiasm. And that's where the skills and leadership, go beyond the authorities of command.
So it is, it's moving from a command and control form of leadership to a more of an influence model of leadership. How do you persuade and influence them to do this? For example, through the model you established for yourself and for the establishment of values.
But you have to do both. Your responsibilities as command. A situation in which things are fairly stable and we can discuss how to solve a problem is full of the opportunity to create buy-in and leadership, exercise leadership. When you get into the hot, heat of battle, and you are now into the doing, now you have to fall back on the more direct and more authoritarian exercise of your responsibilities, although you never lose sight of the other. But this is not the time to have a collegial debate about the wisdom of whether we want to do this or not. It is time, we can talk about it later, but it's time to execute. But where the stresses of the environment give you the latitude, spending the effort to create the sense of teamwork, because it is building a team to get that buy-in. pays off when you go to the other environment where you have to do, the level of trust is very high. And there you have to go in a shorthand method of decision making and very quickly canvassing for opinions. We're going to do this, let's go. The payoff is in that situation.
Because you built the trust already.
You've built that sort of that confidence and the ability to lead.
The Army seems to have undergone enormous transformation in the way it thinks about leadership. Years ago, there was a lot of hazing of first-year students at West Point, for example. That's changed a lot.
Significantly. And some of that, a good bit of that due to John Abzade, who was a commandant at the military academy and is now serving as the combatant commander of Central Command. Rick Olson, who came after him, who's now commanding the 25th Division and headed to Afghanistan. And it was the sense of applying these leadership principles that we're trying to describe here, the difference between command and leadership. And to start building this mature sense of what leadership really is, even as youngsters arrive in the military academies, not just West Point, in that first year. There's still some very strict discipline and regimentation that goes on that first year, but the hazing is a thing of history.
And so George Patton approach, he's no longer he's a model for some instances, but not for all instances of how one leads the troops today. The Patton examples out of the movie Patton certainly, to what degree those are accurate. Belittling your soldiers is never, if that's how you interpret those scenes, was never a good formula, because it imposes on others a sense of your leadership style. And when things are hot and dangerous, what you need is a good cohesive team that has great trust in one another and never have to wonder whether or not what interests are being served here. So we found it far more productive to have strong, a good organization. Strong, cohesive organizations will withstand the pressures of combat. Good organizations that have even hairline fractures in them, the pressures of combat will make those pronounced. They do not become stronger. And so the importance here is to pay attention to those things in your peacetime and garrison locations, to work hard on creating strong organizations that deal with leader-to-lead issues, that deal soldier-to-soldier issues, that deal with socialization issues. You put a good deal of emphasis, I'm going to let you go here very shortly, you put a good deal of emphasis, and we'll come back and help discuss more, upon leaders producing leaders, leaders growing leaders within their own organization.
I do believe that's a responsibility of leadership. There are lots of discussions about graduating from this leadership program or that leadership program, or being in a good organization, and all of that contributes. But the growth of leaders is overwatched and nurtured by other leaders. Being in a good division in the Army only allows you to have a process. But unless the commander of the 3rd Infantry Division or the commander of the 1st Cavalry Division have vested themselves with the development of those youngsters during his tenure or her tenure in command, you don't have the leader development programs that we need. As a young major, I graduated from the Command and General Staff College. What I wanted to do was to go back to a unit and get down into a battalion so that I could serve as a major in a troop unit. I had no idea that I was 15 years away from being a very senior general officer. And I was 5 years away at that time from commanding a battalion, 10 years from commanding a brigade, and 15 years from commanding a division as a two-star general. I had no idea. But as I've gone back and looked at this, this is a rhythm of the Army, that majors today in about 5 years will be eligible for battalion command, and about 10 years will be eligible for brigade command, and the ones who are fortunate enough to be selected for general officer and then command of a division are about 15 years away from that likelihood. With only 10 divisions in the active Army, that's a very small opportunity. But unless youngsters have an appreciation of where this is likely to lead, and none of us knows whether Shinseki or Geren is going to be selected to command, what you want is a population of officers preparing themselves so that when you get to that point 15 years from now and you have a look at what's available, you have a rich opportunity to select from. I never had that perspective as a young major, but as I have grown through those echelons, I play that back, and it's true for every year group. I tell you now, there are majors in the United States Army today who 15 years from now will be commanding divisions. And in my case, commanded a division in 1994, and 1999 I'm now the Chief of Staff of the Army.
Wow.
And so what better reason to have leader development for the entire population so that your selections are assured of having leaders who have applied themselves and developed along the way. Good selection group to look at.
Yeah, Colin Powell once told me that the Army is different in one sense from a normal company, and that is you have to select from within when you choose your new CEO.
Absolutely.
And you've got to select from within when you want your new vice president, and therefore you better grow your own leaders.
Yeah.
So it's critical to do that.
And if the senior leadership today does not, and they do, but if they weren't paying attention to develop those subordinate leaders,
Right.
15 years from now, you know, what's the offering? And that's why I say in competent organizations, and I consider the Army a competent organization, leaders are invested with the responsibility
Right.
of growing subordinate leaders.
What's interesting is this takes how long this takes, though you spend a lot of time in the tactical level getting up to major before one has it. Then things start to change, can start to change pretty rapidly.
It accelerates.
Yeah. But there's a long time in place learning fundamentals before you have an opportunity to move up like that.
Yeah.
You know, for a lot of kids who want to be on a fast track, be running something at the age of 35.
Well, there is that opportunity, but there are very few tracks that are that fast in the Army.
Yeah. Tell me what, let me stop here because I want to come back another time to your own efforts to transform the Army. But if you were talking to a young person who is 24, 25, 26, man or woman, in civilian life, what would be your top 2 or 3 recommendations to them if they want to exercise leadership in civilian life? What should they be up doing? How should they get about their lives?
Well, I wouldn't presume to know too much. Most of my experiences have been in a very structured organization. But I do think that having a good understanding of who you are and what your strengths and weaknesses are, and this is this self-awareness that I talk about, is important. I also subscribe to the theory that there are 2 ways you can approach your leadership responsibilities, and those who are truly gifted are more challenged about this than perhaps an average bear like Shinseki. But as you grow in organizations and your span of responsibility and span of control increases, it's difficult to know it all and do it all yourself. And so someplace in here, you have to learn how to activate the one big collective brain. The gifted, the bright amongst us are sort of the one big brains, but the other alternative, the other option is the one big collective brain where you get the energy out of your organization. And it's a little different leadership style. I think most of us begin in the tactical level with the one big brain approach because experience-wise we know more, we've seen more, and have skills that may give us a little more success than others. But at some point you find you have to change. And the ones who are the most gifted sometimes find that more difficult to do early. And but if you are going to run a large organization in which vision is important, then your ability to deliver that vision, any achievements along the way, are going to be driven by the performance of those who embrace the vision with you. And if you are not able to communicate to them, inspire them that this is their shared vision with you, then it'll be a lot more difficult, maybe a shorter run towards that vision, maybe no accomplishments. And a shared vision is an important part of the visioning process. And to do that, you have to exercise this, this larger embracing quality that goes along with the one big collective brain approach. Self-awareness, this ability to communicate and build teams, adaptiveness. I think all of us would like to see things run exactly as we have described. They never do, and so you have to have this flexibility to be able to adjust. I guess determination. If you're going to be successful at the business of leadership, it isn't easy. It's hard work. It takes a lot of creative thinking and determination.
Excellent. Well, I was told that for camera here, this book that you've just come out, co-edited an introduction to on Be, Know, Do, Leadership the Army Way, with an introduction by Francis Hesselbein and General Eric Shinseki. General Shinseki, thank you again, sir,
David,
for your visit here
always
and your
great to
time.
be here.
And we invite you back soon.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Terrific.